Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Francois Nel. I'm a reader in media innovation and entrepreneurship here at the University of Central Lancashire, where we're coming to you live this afternoon from the Media Factory in our Media Innovation Studio. And we are really thrilled to have people online in the room. We have today with us a little bit of sound issues, but we will try to get that resolved as soon as possible and ask for your patience with that. This is a difficult time for many of us, whether the issues are social-political, whether they are economic, whether they are environmental. There are forces and factors coming into us from all sorts of angles and all sorts of directions. And for those of us in newsrooms, it is perhaps never been more complicated than it is today. And try to make sense and find clarity within this chaos is certainly a starting point for us, not just to get insight, but also to inspire action. That's what we've been doing here of the last couple of days and for the rest of this week as part of the Journalism, Innovation and Leadership program here at the University of Central Lancashire. But this afternoon, we're inviting people, participants who have been on this program, people who are currently involved, people who are part of our visiting faculty, as well as friends and others from outside of our direct community and in the wider network, to share with you how they are thinking through this age of disruption and how they are making sense of it and also taking action going forward. We are going to invite some questions along the way, so please feel free to make use of the Q&A and the chat. We also want to, before we start, just say that there will be opportunities at the end to share more about our program. And also just want to remind you that, and with thanks to the Google News Initiative, who's been really a fantastic supporter of this program and much of the work we do here at the Media Innovation Studio, but also others, Chrysalis Transformations, Jez Clifford, Media Lab Jordan, International Media Support, IMS, the Denmark-based development agency, and then also this year, ftstrategies. All have invested in making this program and our activities possible. So I'd like to thank them for their continued support and investment in this. We have 3 panels for you, and I'm just going to introduce our first chair. I'm proud to say many of you will know her as the editor of journalism.co.uk. We also know Marcela fondly as an alumna of our Leaders program and a continued friend and participant in our community. Marcela, without further ado, over to you and your panel.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you for the introduction, and I wholeheartedly agree. This is probably the most chaotic time we have seen in the media industry, although it has never been golden age. Let's start with our 2 panelists who are here with us. That's John Birchall from LadBible and Rachel Arthur. Guys, would you like to introduce yourself to our delegates, so virtual delegates? Tell us about your organizations and your role in them, please. Let's start with you, Rachel.
Yes, hello. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Rachel Arthur. I'm the founder and editor of Saloon, which is a global movement to democratize creativity for good. Our editorial explores the UN Sustainable Development Goals through the lens of creativity, which is quite niche, and all of our different endeavours all go to supporting a series of community-led projects, which are all about using creativity to inspire and empower people facing challenges. To date, these challenges have touched on the likes of substance abuse, homelessness, forcible displacement, and our current project is all about rewriting the story of dementia.
Yeah, I'm John Birchall. I'm Director of Editorial Strategy for LadBible Group. So we are the world's largest social publisher. We have the largest Facebook following in the world, the largest TikTok following in the world of a publisher, and I oversee our O&O business. We have 6 web brands across a number of different niches and verticals: tech, gaming, sport, as well as our kind of core Lad brand. And yeah, I joined the business 2 years ago from Reach PLC, so know plenty of people in the room and plenty of people on the call. So lovely to be here, and yeah, lovely to talk to you all.
I inform you all, darling viewers, that Francois introduced a new concept for this session that is called the green chair, which is Rachel. So Rachel will offer her take on sustainability angle and sort of how green our new endeavors as leaders are. And before we jump into the questions, I have 2 announcements. First is to address the kind of the elephant in the room, which is the young leader. So we spoke about it yesterday with a panel. Where do we cut off the point or the age point for, when you are not a young leader anymore? And we all agreed being young is not a number, it's a mindset. So if you are young at heart and you have a young style leadership, you are a young leader.
Yeah, I thought maybe we'd take the opportunity to say hello and say to Marcela's point, what do we define as young? Just because you're young doesn't mean you're good at using technology, because I had trouble getting into the call. So sorry that I'm a few minutes late. Really nice to meet all of you. My name is Aliya and I work at ftstrategies. We're a consultancy within the Financial Times. And essentially what we do is we help our clients, which are predominantly other newspapers and other media organizations, with their business models and help them with the challenges that they encounter, using some of the best practices from the Financial Times. So really nice to meet all of you. And maybe just to pick up where Marcela left off, we the 3 of us were exploring a bit yesterday. What do we really define as young audiences? And actually we thought that this is more actually about mindset than any particular cutoff or age group. And I know, John, that you work a lot with younger audiences in your role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the entire business of LadBible Group, for those who don't know, launched a decade ago, just over actually, from a Facebook page. It has changed a lot in that time. I mean, as a brand, it was very much focused towards young men in the early 2010s, has since evolved into a much broader business, a thankfully much more diverse business as well. But that idea of trying to speak to young people, young adults, we typically focus our audience from kind of the ages of 14 to 30, but we're growing with that at the same time. So yeah, in terms of what a young leader is, what a young audience is, again, we kind of came onto this idea of it being more of a mindset, more of a reflection of what is new in the industry, what are new ways of engaging, what are new ways of speaking to people, and what are the issues and stories that young people care about. And I think we all agreed that doesn't really become defined by any particular age on a passport. It's really something that kind of stretches across all leadership styles, all audience styles. And yeah, we kind of spoke a little bit about that yesterday.
I might just chime in. I realise we're somewhat ad-libbing while Marcela joins us, but just a kind of additional point, which is a little bit tangential on that front. We work in a very interdisciplinary manner, And I notice a lot that there seems to be a lag in terms of the discussion around operating in more of an intergenerational manner. And I also think, if I can voice this aloud, I think there's a lot of arrogance that exists within that space. And often not so much of a willingness to learn from the full spectrum of ages that I see in particular in media and publishing. It's something that we're really trying to push back against, but it does happen quite often. If we have an event that brings together a very intergenerational type audience, we love to work with the types of people who will accept that actually I might learn even more from this person who's right at the beginning of things than I might from someone who, dare I say it, has gone through a lot of the same processes and been taught a lot of the same ways of thinking. But it is something that feels like it's coming to the fore a lot more, certainly as I work more in this industry. And I just think it's a really interesting topic because we speak a lot about age when it's attached to leadership, and we speak about particular facets of audience, but maybe not that more intergenerational learning between them. So I thought I would throw that out there whilst we sort out all the specifics.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think it speaks to diversity more broadly. I think when I look at some of the most inspirational people I've worked with during my career, think back to my time at Reach, it wasn't a subset of a certain type, or certainly shouldn't have been a subset of a certain type of young person that was kind of driving the business forward. It was really an increased diversity of voices in the room, whether that be, age, gender, ethnic background. I think when I look at the big steps that we as an industry have made, it's typically been the more that you're reflective of the audience that you're trying to speak to, the better. And I think any business that tries to pigeonhole, or newsroom that tries to pigeonhole themselves into only speaking to a very specific certain type of person is really putting themselves on the back foot. So I think obviously diversity of age is an incredibly important thing, and it's been a very helpful thing, I think, in helping to move the industry forward. But I'd say it's one of many factors where, I think we've made good moves as an industry, and I'm speaking as the white man on the panel, I recognize that, but I do think that we have over time, and I've certainly seen it around the businesses that I've worked in, having that stronger diversity, having that improved range of voices kind of contributing towards what the wider business strategy should be, what the wider newsroom strategy should be, has only been a good thing. So we're saying young, but I think hopefully what we're going to be talking about is relevant to all.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And talking about leadership, which I think is meant to be the subject of our panel as well, it's interesting beginning to manage people as well, like where I am in my career. And as a millennial, as a proud millennial, often you're now managing Gen Zs who have a different way of working, I think. And I think that often they have much clearer boundaries than maybe we had when we were coming up in our careers at first. And that's been a learning curve for me as well. I actually think it's probably a good thing that they push back as much as they do, and they're much clearer about things like work-life balance, but it's definitely very different from how we came up in the business even 10, 15 years ago. So it's really interesting. And I think it's interesting how our generation kind of straddles those two generations, like the people that mentored and helped us, and then now the people that we are managing, they have very, very different outlook, I think, on work. And so that's been something for me, is where I have to learn how people want to be managed and how they like to work, and usually just finding the way to get the best out of everyone, which is easier said than done. But I think it just comes down to asking like, how frequently would you like to meet? Some people work better in the morning, some people work better in the evening, and I usually find that as long as you're getting your work done, I feel like the best way is usually whatever works for that individual. But it is interesting, just the generational differences, and I think our generation kind of sits in the middle sometimes. So maybe that means that we can act as a bridge, and should act as a bridge between those like cultural norms.
Yeah, I would completely agree on that front. But sometimes I think we're lagging a bit in that we can't have this huge shift in ways of working without a wider industry foundational shift of everything that holds up the craziness that is publishing and media. Because I just don't see that working in the same way with, it's not built on a work-life balance. Let's just call a spade a spade. And I definitely think we need to move towards that. But I think it does require, as I say, a much bigger kind of foundational shift. And sometimes I think we're a bit guilty of, we all know that we want to move towards that and we try to make that happen, but without the underpinning of things operating in a wildly different manner, I don't suspect it will happen overnight. But I completely agree with everything you're saying there, Aliya. I think there's a lot of changes that are being made for the better. It's just how we can kind of capitalize on those and pull them across the whole industry. I don't know, John, if you've got any, maybe you've got the silver bullet answer of how we do that.
I wish. I think something that Aliya said, which was really, really interesting there, was around how forthcoming I think perhaps Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as will be, are in terms of laying out their expectations. And I think one of the things that I've found from a leadership perspective is perhaps more than when I entered the industry 10, 15 years ago, they know their value. They understand, I have people in my team who were born after Facebook launched, born after YouTube launched. They've been surrounded by creators. They know people, friends with kind of TikTok businesses. So when it comes to kind of digital audiences, they have an innate understanding of the value of that. They know what a CPM is, they know what an RPM is, and they see it as part of their responsibility. And so as a result, they want to know some of the other issues, and I'm sure we'll come on to them when Marcela comes back. But in terms of kind of finding clarity, I think one thing that I found with younger people in our business, from the most junior reporters, I suppose people on the junior programmatic side would naturally understand the kind of the business model or the revenue model behind media. I'm sure Marcela will jump in at some point, but I think it's a really interesting point around how forthcoming and how much information that younger people want when working in a newsroom or in the publishing space. I'll shut up now, Marcela.
So you know what? The biggest challenge that leaders face today is technology. I really apologize for my computer. It just absolutely checked out. Right. Where did we arrive? Our lovely panel. I'm sure that you were so well briefed. You just carried on. No one even noticed I wasn't there.
We kind of flipped it on its head and ended up talking about generational differences quite a lot, but I'm sure there's more to be said.
Excellent. So who hasn't spoken yet about generational differences?
I think we all have.
I think we all, I think we all weighed in a bit, but we were getting towards that question of like leadership and different ways of working. This is kind of what we were talking about.
Amazing. So I suppose one of the most important things when the situation is chaotic and there is just overload of information, I think you would agree there's no scarcity of advice when it comes to leadership or information or report or data. Where are you guys looking for information to make sense of chaos? Shall we start with you, Aliya?
Yeah, sure. So it's an interesting question, because I was just thinking about that actually in the context of doing a lot of reading right now about AI and how AI is disrupting our industry. And it sort of depends what I'm looking for, but what I've found very helpful actually is following certain people that I consider like thought leaders in the space. So following certain people on LinkedIn that post really thoughtful and interesting things, as well as on Medium, for example, if I'm looking for more kind of thought pieces. But then also using Twitter a fair amount, with the big caveat that nowadays you really cannot trust fully what the algorithm is surfacing, obviously, because the quality of the information has been somewhat compromised by some of the changes by our friend Elon Musk. But I still find, though, that it's very helpful for understanding where the conversation's going and what people are talking about, especially in fast-moving areas like AI. So I use those channels, and then I also talk to my colleagues a lot. And to the point made earlier by John and Rachel, like sometimes also your younger colleagues can actually surface things that you never would have come across. And so that's also helpful for me. What are they seeing? What are they talking about?
Can you recommend some people you follow on LinkedIn or any newsletters on Medium, Substack that our viewers can see themselves and get the information from? Maybe you can post a few of the recommendations in the chat. Does everyone have access to chat? A question for the organizer. Let's hope yes. And yeah, if you can put a few recommendations, and I think this is something we can all do. If you think of something, you can just put stuff in the chat, so everyone who is watching can sort of copy that and maybe just follow the accounts in real time. John, how do you get information?
I think very similar, but with trying not to repeat everything that Aliya has just rightly said. I suppose on a slightly different tangent or a slightly different way of looking at it, I've been thinking about that idea of clarity a lot, and everyone in the industry or everyone in the business having clarity and the importance of transparency that comes from that. And I mean, I went from Reach to LadBible Group, and we're a business of roughly 500 people, so a large organization where a huge amount of information coming in. And I think the most valuable information I get is probably internal, and the breaking down of silos or knowledge gaps kind of within an organization that makes that happen. So I think I've worked in or seen other news businesses or newsrooms where, knowingly or unknowingly, it excludes a huge number of the people from the realities of, the industry, the business. It could be sales performance, could be, again, the yield on a programmatic basis, what the audience are doing, what they want. And I think we're missing, or have traditionally missed, a huge part of what our customers are telling us, what the market is telling us. And I remember traveling around newsrooms when I first arrived at Reach, and it was Alison, who I think is in the room in Preston, who encouraged me to just go and spend as much time with as many newsrooms as possible and really listen to, what their challenges are, what are the things that they're working on, what are they excited about. And I think that was incredibly helpful for me as someone who kind of went in a central role to Reach. People didn't really know or have a meaningful way of responding to some of the challenges they faced. They conceptually knew that print sales were down, and they conceptually knew that classifieds were disappearing. They knew that page views were going up, but what that actually meant for the business, I think there was always a little bit of a lack of clarity there. And I think we've got better at that as an industry, from journalists, editors to understanding. I think we've been forced to face some of the kind of revenue questions or business challenges that come. But I still think there's work to do. I was speaking to someone at a will remain unnamed large news organization, and they work in the commercial department. And the lack of understanding of what their editorial team were doing and vice versa was just so shocking, and I think still remains the case. So a slightly different way of looking at it, but genuinely, I think one of the big advantages that I've had moving into LadBible Group is that breaking down of silos, and again, asking those questions around the business of, okay, what are the pinch points? What are the things that we're really excited about? And then kind of laying on top of that a lot of the great insights from thought leaders like Aliya's already referenced.
Amazing. So thought leaders, social media, fantastic source of information, and your colleagues, I suppose, both sort of up and down in a hierarchy in a company, can be a fantastic source of inspiration if only you break down silos and listen. Rachel, how about your company? How do you get information?
Yeah, so I was going to highlight a couple of different areas, one specifically on the environmental sustainability point of view. So this has been something that's kind of sat at the core of Boom Saloon from our inception, but I'm always very transparent about the fact that it is very much a work in progress, and we are consistently learning and consistently doing better within the space. There was very much a time where we knew nothing about this at all. So in terms of my kind of search and quest for information around that, a big turning point was taking the leap to put my hands up and say, as part of a wider trade association, I'd like to spearhead the course that we're doing in this space. So finding another expert to team up with, kind of pushing out of your comfort zone, but going for it and forcing yourself to learn in a very kind of fast-paced manner. I feel like that kind of took a lot of our learnings from 0 to 100, because we suddenly had to impart upon others the knowledge of how to reduce your digital emissions, start to think about moving to net zero, become au fait with all of the vocabulary around that. I'm still getting my head around a lot of the science side of it. As I say, definitely a work in progress. But that was much more purely digital. But what I found really interesting was it then opened doors. So I'm really happy to now sit on FIP Sustainability Committee, which cuts across both print and digital, which is much more aligned with what we do. But sometimes I think that's a really great way to start to dip your toes into a new field of information by, well, not really dipping your toes in, kind of diving headfirst, because you are essentially forced to get up to speed very quickly. So that was just one that jumped out at me as something that's maybe a bit, potentially a bit different. And then in terms of our own specific audience, I just wanted to touch on something fairly new for us. So at the end of last year, we launched a membership model, and we were open for 1 month for founding members. So our founding members directly support our community projects and receive a series of membership benefits in thanks for that. But they also receive essentially a new level of access above and beyond what anyone else would receive. So to give you a perfect example, we launched on Tuesday. On a Thursday, we had a full day strategy session with everything. I mean, here's the entire business financial projections on the table, and we had one of our founding members in the room, and they do not hold back, which is what we all speak about. We didn't really know which way it was going to fall, but that flow of information is definitely a two-way street, and there is consistently feedback coming from our audience and our readers in terms of these are the topics that we want to be discussing, these are the types of partnerships we want to see more of, these are the avenues that we want to see you exploring. So that's been a real eye-opener for us, because that information is now coming directly to us, and it is fed by our audience directly, which, dare I say, it starts to cut down some of our workload, which is great. But it also means that we know it's something that is immediately of interest to them, and is just, I find at least, quite an interesting way of thinking about information and about how you know you're serving your audience best by just doing what they are telling you to do. So yeah, there are two that have kind of stood out as particularly useful kind of business shaping ways of gathering information for us.
Mm-hmm. And so the three of you really emphasized listening as almost the way of getting information. But when you're a young leader, is it hard to kind of put your hands up and say, I don't know?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I don't think so. No one knows. I think if we're all honest, I think there's Francois said it at the very start, there's so much chaos, there's so much change, and it's rapid. I think being able to say you don't know is probably it's probably been the one thing that's helped me the most in my career. In that it's the only way you're going to learn. And again, there are certain things where I absolutely need to lean on the experts in the room. I've joined a business which was very much social first. They have a far better understanding of what a brilliant TikTok's going to look like compared to me, because they're the experts in it. For me, it's understanding, it's knowing what you don't know. I think that's the key thing, and being honest and open about that. And if you can take that to, again, the experts in the room, it's only going to help you. So personally, I've never had an issue with it.
I definitely think that when you're starting off, I don't even think it's when you're starting off, to go to our point about age. I think at any point in your career, you can have those moments of imposter syndrome or questioning, do I really know enough? In a setting like this, when I've been invited to speak on panels, sometimes you think, why am I on a panel? What do I know? But then I think when you start talking to people and you start having interesting conversations, you start to realize how much you know, and you start actually also through those conversations, that's how you learn. So then you sort of grow in confidence. But I definitely have had many moments like you described, Marcela, where you're sort of like, do I have the authority to speak on this subject, or why are people coming to me? Especially in my role, I'm giving advice a lot of times to some quite senior people that sometimes they've been working longer than I've been alive. And then I'm giving them advice on their business. So you can definitely feel sometimes, who am I to sit across the table from this person? But I think, to what we were saying before, like, everyone brings a unique perspective. And the more you talk to people, the more you learn. And that then becomes power that you can share with others. So that's helped me a lot. But I definitely sometimes have those moments, like you said, where you wonder why. I think everyone has those moments sometimes.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I definitely think it's something to grow into. I know when, not necessarily when I was younger, but maybe when I first started out, I definitely was a lot worse at just saying, oh yes, and I know that, and then you frantically go away and Google it, or run out of time to Google it and never know. Whereas actually now I try to look at all these things as this is an opportunity to learn more. And I think in particular within this space, we're all wearing so many hats and doing probably at least 3 different job roles in any single day. It's wild to imagine that we will all have the answers to absolutely everything. So instead of thinking of these, I suppose, these moments as a potential form of embarrassment, if you can think of it as an opportunity to learn something and take something from that, I feel like that just changes your mindset and becomes something that's a lot more interesting. And kind of touching on what we mentioned earlier around all the different people that you can learn from and what all those different people might look like, why should it be an embarrassment to have to say, you know, no, I don't know that, I would love to know more, or I'll have to come back to that later. But, you know, as I say, it's definitely something that I had to get used to and get into a groove of saying, because I do think it takes a level of confidence to voice that in front of a room full of people, in particular if it's been pitched as if you should maybe know the answer to that. But I think I've always found it helpful at least to remember, you know, there is a lot of other things that we know. It might be that we just don't know this particular one at this particular point. But I think trying to imagine it as a learning opportunity is definitely something that's helped me going forward.
If I may offer a very quick practical tip, which I've found I've relied on a couple of times over the last couple of months, I've been leaning more heavily into our programmatic setup. And again, it's not my background. I'm not from an ad tech background. And, you know, there's so much jargon in what we do, you know, bid liquidity and all these different phrases and different things. I've taken to ChatGPT and said, can you explain X as if to a child? And honestly, you kind of have to double check it sometimes and take it back to the experts in the field, say, does that actually make sense? But honestly, that has been an incredibly helpful way of just cutting through a lot of the jargon, understanding the very basics of some of the things that we do. So yeah, if anyone uses ChatGPT, that I found that to be quite an effective way of getting around stuff.
Great tip. Thank you, John. Before we continue, can I just double check with everyone that you have access to meeting chat if you want to put your questions, because I'm on a browser and everything looks very different in the app. So if there is any other space where you're guys putting your questions, I can't see it. So please put them in the meeting chat. And we have a question which we're going to take because we'd love to hear from people who are watching us. I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. Moron Gawa Mot is asking, in the face of various pressures navigating the disruption, how do newsleaders ensure that journalistic ethics are not compromised? Loads of things that follow, but it's actually very important. How do you make sure that your journalistic ethic doesn't get compromised when you navigate disruption? Let's start with you, Aliya.
Yeah, it's a good question because it links a lot with AI. Sure, that's maybe one reason you asked it. Is I think everyone this year is concerned about the confluence of rapid AI advancement plus several really big elections happening all over the world in some of the most important democracies. So all of these things are happening at the same time, and there's scope for there's definitely scope for things to go wrong. I'm just going to say it. So, you know, in particular, I imagine you're thinking about things like deep fakes, the fact that now using technology like Midjourney or other imaging technologies, it's very easy to create a video or photo of a politician doing something that may not be true. And then, as you referenced in your question, we have also the pressure in the newsroom to get things out quickly, not to miss important stories as well. That's a big pressure that I remember when I was working as a journalist. You know, you can't be late on a really important story that your competition is covering, but then how do you make sure that you can actually go ahead and talk about something? I think it's a really difficult and important balance, but it's really essential for all of us, right? Because at the end of the day, there's that classic phrase, like, reputations take years to build and they can be destroyed overnight. And in the news business, our reputation's really everything, because our audiences are coming to us because they feel that they can trust us. So it's a really, really difficult one. I don't have all the answers for you. I would just say that, especially where AI is concerned, all the newsrooms that I'm speaking with and using that are using AI still, you know, it's essential to have the human in the loop to verify anything before it's going out. But I think longer term, there's a responsibility on the tech companies and the larger forces at play, right, to make some sort of agreement together on a standard, labeling. So some of them have come out recently and said that they're going to label things that have been made on their platforms so that you can tell that it's a synthetic image. But I think a lot of that responsibility as well is going to fall on the newsroom. So I think it's going to come down to creating systems and extra checks on our end as well. Very long answer, sorry.
Talking about responsibility, Rachel, you are the Green Chair, and there is no shortage of talk about the impact of generative AI and new technologies on climate. How can businesses marry their climate goals with advancement in the tech field?
Yeah, this is a hugely challenging, multifaceted question. So I will try and succinctly cover it. I think there are a huge amount of learnings that sit within a small number of people, and collaboration is going to be key to making a shift within this industry. But I also think this wider foundational shift needs to occur for any real change to happen. We've come so far down the route of everything that we just touched on with this question in terms of the pace of the industry is just unimaginable, but also practices around the likes of ripping and journalism. How did we get to this stage where we feel like we all need to be saying everything all of the time immediately without necessarily thinking about the repercussions and the environmental impacts that creates, essentially? I do think change is definitely happening. I do also think that it needs to happen quicker, however, and it does feel like it will be a wider societal shift. This industry has made so many leaps and bounds forwards in terms of the climate reporting that does exist, the spaces that is held within newsrooms to focus specifically on this. And I think the coverage has, come to the forefront and center with so many different publications, which is incredible to see. It does feel like there is a slight lag in terms of how that information is presented, however, because we're still operating in this old school manner of as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can, absolutely everywhere. I wish I had the exact solution as to how we overcome that. Unfortunately, I cannot give that to you today, but I do think collaboration is going to be absolutely key for this, but also deep learning. The news, media, publishing, we have so much power to shape knowledge. It's unimaginable. I would argue that a lot of people on this call or people who have sat in these seats previously will be a large part of the reason why most of us will think twice when we step on a plane, because we know the environmental impacts of flying, but we are not doing enough to highlight the environmental impacts of consuming the information that we are putting out there, and we very easily could. I still think there is an argument for potentially us choosing not to because of what we assume the impacts of that might be for, to be quite blunt, the bottom line, amongst other things. But we do just need to weigh up what means more at the end of the day. So I think it comes down to two things: collaboration and education at the end of the day. And I think all of the big players within the industry have a lot of work to do in both of those spaces. I do think that there's a lot of hope, and I do think there is a solution to be found. So it's not complete doomsday out there, but I don't think any single person will strike on that by themselves.
Amazing. And I suppose honesty and accountability, even when it comes to news industry, is important. Right, well, let's take a very simple question from Claire Simpson. In terms of completely changing an organization you might have inherited, do you have any tips on where to start? John, you recently changed an organization.
Yeah. I think I'm going to nick something from ftstrategies here, so apologies, Leah. I think having a very clear understanding of what your North Star is, and having everyone bought in to that. And again, I think that comes to the transparency piece as well. And just to touch on something Rachel just said, I think a lot of the worst possible behaviors or lowest common denominator stuff kind of aligned to the bottom line. Maybe I'm an optimist, but I think we are moving to a more sustainable place as an industry, as a media, where, you know, whether it's the higher importance of contextual when it comes to kind of open market advertising, when it comes to, you know, absolute specialists being in demand and really needing to know what they're writing about, what they're recording. I think audiences are demanding a better level of content. So I think, broadly speaking, I think, to take it back to my point around the North Star, I think having that very clear idea of what does that look like, what are we here for? And I mean, I work for a public company. I previously worked for a public company. It sounds a bit dull, but kind of long-term sustainable earnings is what our North Star is. We're very open with that across our team. But there are lots of different ways and means of getting to that point. So actually having people around in the room and then taking that information that I was talking about earlier, the way that we process that, the way that we communicate that is one of the same. It forms our strategy. You know, that's a case of bringing in our commercial partners into the room. It's a case of bringing our social media editors into the room, and everyone sitting around and going, okay, well, how do we work backwards from what that North Star is? And that's really helped to shape some of our key changes that we've made across the business. So I knew that I wanted us to diversify our audience makeup, obviously being very, very much a social first publisher. When I joined 2 years ago, I wanted to grow in different areas. So that was one of the key things, that kind of those pillars that build up to that North Star. I knew that we needed to kind of make changes from a geography perspective, both in terms of where our audience currently is and where we want it to be. Again, that's kind of helped to drive some of the changes that we've made. And I touched on the contextual piece there, but we as an organization feel quite strongly about this idea of building absolute best in class content for certain verticals or certain areas. So we have our Gaming Bible website where, again, huge growth there. We've launched our tech website in November because, again, we're seeing an incredible amount of interesting stories around the tech space and the technology space, but we're also seeing both commercial and audience demand for it as well. So we take all of these different opportunities, and there's a million different things that we could do. It's how closely can we align them to that North Star. So when it comes to changing an organization, it's where do we want to take it to, and then working backwards from there, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And how does all this sit in with the ethics and marrying the ethics, journalistic ethics, with sort of these changes in your organization?
So I think, like Rachel said, I think there are lots of different ways that it can be interpreted when it comes to the bottom line. And again, we're a PLC. You know, there is a demand for us to grow our revenues, to increase our margins, have a stronger EBITDA, so on and so forth. I think for me, the key kind of differentiator that I've put in as part of our North Star for my business is long-term sustainable earnings. It's not a quick buck that is reliant on something which may not be here in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months because of an algorithm change. You know, it's building something that, again, relies on a trusted relationship with your audience. It relies on quality content that, you know, if we are working with platforms like Google and Facebook, you're reliably going to get that content on there and people are going to engage with it in the right way. It's brand safe content. Again, one of the big changes we've made over the last 18 months, 2 years, is really changing the makeup of our content and moving away from, what's the polite way of saying this? the kind of content that brands wouldn't want to be associated with, let's put it that way. So I think it's all part of the same thing. I think it's genuinely possible to create better content and still create better journalism, tell stories that are important to you and your journalists and your audience, while still building towards that North Star. It might not be as quick, but it's certainly something that I think is more sustainable for the long term.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this sort of aligning your content with sort of brands and making sure you sustain the environment that sustains you, as we're about the sort of social media and tech platforms, is there a danger of perhaps betraying some of the journalistic principles, or maybe not delivering the content that your readers want and need?
I think that's where you have to set your own rules. And, we have we will never have interference in our content and the stories that we think are important. We might, look at a certain story and go, is it important that we tell that story? Absolutely. And we'll go ahead and do that, because regardless of whether we can get zero monetization against it, we think it's an important story to tell. And I think there are a lot of occasions where we've done that. We've also partnered with a number of brands in a way that, again, LadBible has had a reputation for some time of being a certain thing. So we've actively tried to reach out to communities and tell different types of stories that people might not have expected from us. So period poverty, for example, the LGBTQ community, actively trying to tell those stories, because again, we've got work to do as an organisation to show organisations and show communities that we are a reliable partner who cares about these things, that reflects those stories and reflects our audience. So in a way, we've almost had to work harder over the last couple of years to do some of that. But again, when it comes to that potential balance of what a potential client wants and what is right from an ethical perspective, that's where we have the control, because we will only publish what we want to publish and won't be censored as a result.
And you, as young leaders in plural, are in charge of that. We have two more questions. One is from Shamiso, and it's how you can an initiative looking for global publicity get the message out there, and steps to take and people to reach out to. So I suppose when you're a leader, you obviously need to lead in your organization, but you also lead your organization in the sort of whole wild world. Have you got any sort of quick tips of the kind of do's and don'ts when you want to sort of get your message or get your organization out there? Let's start with Aliya. We'll hear from you.
Interesting question, Shami. So I guess, usually we're doing this in the context of information that we're publishing as news publishers. But I think whatever the context, thinking about what Rachel said before, what does your audience really want? What does your audience care about? Because the number of times actually that I've worked with news companies, and then you ask them, when was the last time you ran an audience survey or spoke to your audience? And you'd be surprised how many companies don't do that. Because as Rachel was saying, like, your answer usually comes from your readers and your audience. So I think the first thing to think about, Shamiso, is you say, who are the people to reach out to? Well, who are the people you're trying to reach, I think is the real question. Because once you've thought about that, that's when you can start thinking about the content and the right way to package that content. I think, it's talked about a lot, but it is true, the importance of multimedia for certain audiences. So, for example, if you were trying to reach a younger demographic, the importance of video, the importance of summarizing something in a shorter and more digestible form. So I think equally important to what you're trying to say is how you package that, and who it's for. So I think start with that, and then the other questions will follow in terms of how you're going to produce that and on what channels you're going to promote it, because you need to go where those people are going to be. So we've talked about TikTok already in this conversation, but obviously in the last 2-3 years, that's where a younger demographic has shifted. So it really depends, I think, who you're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm. And there is one question directly for you, John. You touched on it when you talk about the ethics, but what were the main cultural differences you first noticed when you moved from Reach to LadBible? And I'll add to that. And how did you navigate the change as a young leader? Where did you kind of get information? How did you communicate, perhaps?
Sure. Yeah, I suppose I'm probably already touched on it a little bit, but I think the key difference really is that kind of transparency across the business, and spending a lot of time when I first joined the business. So before I really implemented anything, thankfully I've had a very patient boss, but I spent a good 2 to 3 months spending time with every part of the business, and again really trying to understand, okay, what are the challenges, where have we seen quick growth, what does that look like, how's that happened? And then I was able to spend a little bit of time really trying to build a strategy. So I think one of the advantages that I was able to have, which again, moving to perhaps a smaller business, well, a smaller business in LadBible, was I had a bit of time to be able to actually formulate a plan and a strategy, which again, I'm very much aware of the challenges that, well, all organizations face in terms of being fast, moving quickly, but really taking that step back and getting that understanding of, does left hand know what the right hand's doing? And I think once you have that and you're able to kind of cut through, again, lots of the historical silos that have existed, a lot of those knowledge gaps which I mentioned, it has just allowed us to go that much more quickly in terms of, you know, being transparent, sharing information. An example that we use is our journalists have access to the revenue information of the content that they create. It's there for them to go and access, to go and see. I've not really worked in a place where that level of information has been available to people, but I came to a business where, you know, we have Facebook natives, TikTok natives, and they can see there in front of them what the platform is giving them from a CPM perspective, what the revenue looks like for every video they create. So for our journalists, it's the same. You know, they should know the value of their content. They do know the value of their content. We don't target them on that. You know, there's not an expectation that X writer needs to deliver Y revenue, but they can get an understanding and have a little bit of buy-in and autonomy in saying, okay, I know that the audience responds very well to this. We know there's a brand safety element to that. So I think that the really big difference that I suppose already existed to some extent, but we've just tried to push harder, is getting everyone into the room, everyone having a say in the strategy and having an understanding of what that North Star is. Naturally, at a larger organization like Reach, that's a harder thing to do, to try and pull things together. But so yeah, I'd say that was probably the biggest change, and certainly an advantage, I'd say, from when I moved from Reach to Lad.
Amazing. One of the most important things to find clarity in chaos, as much as getting information and processing it, is to communicate. So before we end the panel for the break, have you got some quick tips for our leaders on communicating and helping others find clarity in the chaos? Let's start with you, Rachel.
Yes, gosh, it's a biggie. We keep things as simple as we possibly can at BIM Saloon. So we have a very simple tech stack. We only add into that when there's a true benefit that will be seen from the entire team. And I suppose the other, to very quickly throw in a tip there, the other thing we do, which again, to pull something from ftstrategies, we also have a North Star, and we like to have little taglines that we can look at each year. So for this year, we're thinking about how we can make them look, make them think, and make them care. And I find it's really helpful for the team to have a really succinct, this is a tagline, this is what I'm working towards. We have some which are more numerical based, but to have something that each of the team can tap into, I feel is a much cleaner way to communicate wider messaging without endless spreadsheets and back and forth.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I suppose similarly, we have a big thing around accountabilities within our team, and everyone having an understanding of, on that build up to that North Star, the part that they play and they're expected to play. So again, the communication goes both ways. I think one thing that we always try and do with everyone in the team, whether they're a new joiner or someone who's been in the business for a long time, is make sure that they have the tools, the information, the data, everything that they could possibly need. So when we say you're accountable for X, they're not turning around to us in 3-6 months' time and saying, you've asked me an impossible task here, or what you've given me just isn't doable. On the same way, we can be very clear with people to say, look, this is the job, this is what we expect, and these are the things that we're able to give to you. So I think making the communication a two-way street is critical. And again, the accountabilities piece that we do is kind of central to that.
Accountability, empowerment. Aliya?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with communication is just that we are always being inundated with it, right? Like you have information coming in your emails. We use Slack a lot in my company. You also have the news cycle because we work in the news industry. So I have so many things that are just like always competing for my attention. So I think to bring back to what we said at the beginning about listening, I think the first thing is reminding myself to listen. And when I am in a conversation or a meeting, trying to silence all the other things so that I can actually focus on what's happening, having a conversation with you all right now, for example. And then something that I started doing was sort of like time boxing the other communications. So for my emails, for example, I'm experimenting something new at the moment, but I basically have like certain times when I'm actually going through them during the day. And that also helps me because I think it's very hard when you're always task switching and then your brain can't really perform anything properly. So that's something I'm doing. And then I think in terms of actually presenting, if any of you are looking for tips on speaking in that sense, the number one thing that I've always received or given feedback on is slowing down. I think most of us, when we're nervous, we start speaking faster and faster, and speaking a little bit slower than you feel is natural actually usually ends up sounding about right. And actually, sometimes when you speak slower, I think when I see good speakers like our CEO at the FT, for example, he actually speaks quite slowly. And most leaders do, if you notice, and it gives them a sense of some more authority. So that's another tip. Maybe speak a bit slower if you can.
Amazing. All those are fantastic tips, and you have shared just some amazing knowledge that I'm sure all our leaders will find extremely useful. Thank you so very much, panel. John, Aliya, and Rachel. Everyone, give it the virtual applause for our panel, and I hand it over to Francois. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Marcela, John, Aliya, Amman, Rachel. It's been fantastic to have your thoughts with us. We're going to take a quick break now. And just to remind you, we're going to continue our conversations around creating clarity in this chaos. Ivor Price from Food for Mzansi is going to be chairing that panel. You wouldn't want to miss it because with him is Gada Omar, a producer and anchor for El Mamlaka TV, Nata Devashili, CEO of Indigo Magazine in Jordan, and of course Jackie Merrington, the founder of The Happy Journalist here in the UK.